After a couple of recent videos on the Kailash and Annapurna Ecovillages in Portland, Oregon, a lot of viewers were asking, hey, how could I get into one of these ecovillages? Well, not to worry, you have three options. One is to get on the wait list if you're lucky enough to be in Portland. Unfortunately, the wait list for Kailash is about 700, but the last time I checked Zillow, Annapurna, the new ecovillage opening next door, had one vacancy. Another option is to redo your neighborhood plan with your city to have it recognized as an urban ecovillage. And this is exactly what I did in the Green Acres neighborhood of Bloomington, Indiana. And in fact, I did a prior episode on that, which I've linked at the end of this episode. Now, your final option, and this is for the real diehards, is to build your own ecovillage. And that's the topic of today's episode. Welcome to Edenicity, best practices for sustainably abundant cities. Okay, to build your own eco-village, you're going to need four things, and I've got to warn you, there's almost no shortcuts. I've only come up with two ways to shorten the process, and they're both in this video. And I won't even keep you in suspense. The first shortcut is to develop urban apartments. I've heard from several rural eco-village founders that they've really struggled to attract residents. And I've even experienced this myself, trying to develop a tiny house eco-village just outside of city limits in Athens, Ohio. The problem is, as this viewer pointed out, that most people just want to be handed a key and enjoy a place instead of doing the hard work of creating it. And from my experience, this is absolutely right. It's a rare person who wants to create an eco-village, and if you do, you want to do it where there's a lot of other people already living who might want to lend a hand in making it happen. And there's actually a second reason why you might think twice about founding a rural eco-village. Now, I know it can be tempting to buy land far from the city where it's really cheap, but don't think you're going to escape regulations in a rural area. In fact, in some cases, they can be worse. As one viewer pointed out, county code controllers don't understand urine diverting dry composting, presumably because of pressure from septic installation and service companies. Another viewer agreed that there were bans on gray water, tiny homes on wheels, humanure, and so forth. The same viewer also pointed out that in rural areas, density zoning doesn't allow for clustering dwellings and pooling all the rest of the land for food forests and other uses. Just something else to think about when you're considering that $5,000 or $10,000 ranch a few dozen miles from the city. By contrast, the urban eco-villages in Portland have been thriving, but it did take a lot of money when it was all said and done. And that gave a lot of viewers pause too. Talking about Annapurna, the second eco-village, how did the developer make $8 million so quickly? Actually, we'll get into the details of the finance in a moment. And others wanted to know the same thing too. Let me just point out right at the outset that the developer who lives on site, Ole Ersson, did not start out rich. I know this is how it looks, but Ole's actual path was far more interesting. So in the next few slides, I'll try to distill his timeline from a couple of hour-long videos that I've linked in the description below. The main thing to know about Ole is that he grew up on a farm. He started out poor, but with quite a few skills that allowed him and his wife, Maitri, to renovate a completely dilapidated old church in the mid-1980s, and presumably either rent or sell that at a significant profit. In 1990, when he started medical school, he and Maitri bought an abandoned halfway house right across from the medical school for $22,500 and lived in that house and fixed it up over the years, and were able to sell it eventually in 2003 for $300,000, which is just a massive profit. He earned his medical degree, began working as a doctor, and the couple renovated at least 3 additional houses and gardens. They also kept their expenses to an absolute minimum. Ole rode his bike and the bus, and through much of his career, didn't even own a car. And I think that's still true today. Now, when they bought Kailash for $1.7 million in 2007, they had to come up with a down payment. Your typical commercial loan terms are 30% down on a 15-year loan. And in order to raise that money, they had to mortgage all of the other houses that they owned and were presumably renting out. And remember, they bought these homes cash, and they put in a ton of sweat equity fixing them up and making them nice. So the key point here is that by the time they started Kailash, they had already spent 2 decades flipping houses and managing rentals. They also had a role in launching Coho and Columbia ecovillages. Here's the Columbia site with additional co-housing and intentional communities. So they had experience with intentional communities and co-housing. in addition to managing rentals and fixing up houses, and saving a lot of money, not driving cars, and not having to buy so much food at the store because they were growing it at home. All right, that was 2007. So by the time they bought Annapurna in 2023, they had no doubt fully paid off the mortgage in Kailash. And Ole had worked probably about 28 years as a physician in a lifestyle where he spent very little of that money. Now, during those 16 years between the two big property purchases, Ole and the Ecovillage community put a lot of work into upgrading it, which again, both increased its value and built their experience and their confidence in their new way of life. Now, the following section is just for people who are really serious about starting their own ecovillage someday. And you have to understand that this is going to be a little bit of forensic analysis with a spreadsheet where I'm having to make a lot of educated guesses about how Ole's finances worked. All right, here's the spreadsheet. And just keep in mind again that it took me about an hour to put this together, whereas Ole and Maitri had decades to think about and refine their financial plan, and no doubt were far more sophisticated than what I'm going to show you here. Let's get into it. So there's Kailash, there's the down payment, there's the mortgage, 15-year term. I looked up the mortgage rate on US News and was able to see what the rates were like in 2007, 6.3, but I added 3/4 of a point because it's a commercial loan and potentially high risk. And then I come over here to May of 23, basically the same story. So in both cases, I'm rounding up to 7. It's possible that they negotiated a better deal than that, but that seems a pretty safe bet. So that's a $10,000 mortgage a month. The property taxes, again, you can look this up almost anywhere. Just look up the property tax map for anywhere. And there we can see the selling price, and then there's the property taxes right there. I reverse engineered the rents and how much money they were making from this. And again, you can just look at historical rents from any location going back into time. So I went back to 2007 and I took $800 rents for Portland and then discounted them to about $600, which would be my guess as to what they were actually charging, based on the fact that an average of all the different rents that Ole's spoken about in interviews for Kailash in 2023 worked out to about $900 a month. So that includes the old timers whose rents have increased at a much slower rate than the market. I'm extrapolating the rents that he's probably charging on average today and extrapolating that back. The rents might have actually worked out a little higher than this, but I just wanted to be on the safe side. We have the income from the rents. These taxes here are just a 1/12 of the $50,000 property taxes. Maintenance and insurance, just a wild guess. Per unit, total maintenance per month, about $4,000. Profit, let's call it $800 a month or $9,600 a year. Now, by 2023, the picture had changed dramatically. First of all, the mortgage was paid off. Rents are a little bit higher, so the income's a little higher. Taxes, we're just assuming that across the board. This is probably a little high. And then maintenance and insurance increases a little bit for a whopping $20,000 profit over a couple of years, assuming that they didn't pay off the mortgage early, which they probably did. We can then take that figure and put it into the money available for Annapurna. All right, so here's the picture for Annapurna. $8 million, including a $1.2 million construction loan. Down payment 30%, $2.4 million. We'll see in a moment if he had that money lying around. Mortgage, $5.7 million, 15 years, same mortgage rate. Monthly mortgage is $51,000, so 5 times more. This is a much higher risk property, but also potentially much higher return. Property tax is $94,000. Again, looking it up as before. And the new property has a mix of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units. And again, I looked up the rents in Portland and depreciated them using the advertised rate on Zillow of $1,450 a month, which is a little bit below the market rate of $1,895 for a 2-bedroom. And then I just extrapolated that to the other rents and came up with an estimated income, assuming that they basically just have that one vacancy. So that would be $75,842 a month, taxes $7,000, again from the property tax site. Maintenance fee, $250 a month per unit because he has a full-time property manager now, and a total profit of about $3,000 a month, much of which I expect will go into renovations like solar voltaic on the roof, depaving and creating the garden, and so forth. Though perhaps the construction loan will cover some of that as well. So let's look at the finances from the date of purchase of Kailash all the way through till the purchase of Annapurna. So Ole did a very clever thing. Rather than trying to be in private practice or become a specialist surgeon who had to travel a lot, he chose to be a public health physician, which means this is a city or state position. It probably comes with a pension. It probably comes with relatively normal working hours, at least for a doctor. And the salary was something that I could look up again online. So a public health physician salary in Oregon averages about $180,000, but then There were some other estimates that went as low as $144,000 a year. So what I did was assume that he was near the upper end of that range right now. This is probably conservative. He's been working as a physician for about 28 years, so it could be higher than this. And then I just depreciated that back to 2007, just with a 3% annual inflation, which puts him at about $110,000 starting salary in 2007. Again, it was probably more than this. His take-home pay, if he's smart with taxes, could have been as high as $66,000, rising to $105,000. And I'm assuming that his family got by on about $30,000 a year. That would be $12,000 for rent. Ole and Maitri currently live in a one-bedroom in Kailash. And remember, they have far lower grocery expenses than most people because they're growing a lot of food in their garden. And they don't own a car and haven't for years. There's room in their budget for a fairly lavish family vacation every single year on this salary, and they would still have quite a bit of cash available every year. Now, the Kailash after-tax profits, I'm assuming, were quite low every year. This is a very conservative assumption. And so combining those, they had $40,000 to invest. Now, these investments could be buying more properties, investing in an index fund. I'm assuming that they're getting a steady 7% after taxes, and I'm assuming that they're fairly sophisticated. As you can see, it really adds up in a hurry. Annapurna required a down payment of $2.46 million. Their investments came to $1.9 million. So there's a $500,000 shortfall. Where would he come up with that? Well, by this time, his mortgages on all the other properties are paid off through income from those properties. So he has the option to sell those properties at market value, which I took a wild guess at using the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis estimate for property values in the Portland area. So I'm assuming median value of $240,000 when they bought Kailash, rising to $447 or so. So I took the ratio of those two numbers, the 447 and the 240, and then multiplied that by the $510,000 that he had available from mortgaging all the properties before. They could sell the properties and have this much equity, and that would more than make up for the shortfall and allow them to buy Kailash. Again, the key move here is to use your existing properties again and again as collateral to get the loans you need going forward. And this makes sense because you're bringing in not just more debt, but also more income, which brings us back to your situation. So you want to build an urban multifamily eco-village. The four things you need are money, skills, people, and time. Well, time, of course, will take care of itself, but everything else is a matter of putting in the reps. Let's start with money. The key is to save way more than you spend. And you'll do this by setting up automatic recurring systems to make money and invest it for the future. Now, I did a video a few weeks back that didn't get a lot of love on this channel because it featured Alex Hormozi riding in his private jet, which doesn't exactly resonate with most viewers of this channel, talking about how important it was to live cheap and save money early on in his entrepreneurial career. If you're really serious about building an eco-village and you're starting out without any money, you've got to get on top of this stuff. That means getting the best skilled job you can find, living with roommates, living car-free or car-light. Hormozi has a couple stories about that. Setting up auto-pay so your credit cards are paid in full every month. That builds you some good credit and keeps you from paying the $2,500 or so that the average American spends in credit card fees every year. And if you're not already a financial planner, talk to one. And again, see that Hormozi episode for additional motivation and tips. All right, we've got through the hard stuff. Let's get to the second shortcut that I promised, and that is to volunteer with Habitat for Humanity. I got in touch with Adam Nelson, a land development manager at Habitat for Humanity's Greater Cincinnati office, and asked him if it would make sense to send prospective eco-villagers to Habitat for Humanity to gain skills in construction and build contacts and community that they would need later on when they start upgrading their own properties and building co-op houses and eco-villages on their own. He got back to me and said, well, short answer, volunteering would be a fantastic way to learn building skills. Longer answer, yes, community, community, community. Everything that I'm coming to understand about resiliency involves doing everything you can with community. Learning how to build with people is as or more important than simply learning how to build. Habitat.org is truly an impressive organization that works in the fields of home construction and repair all over the world, in 70 countries, having helped 59 million people get into much more stable housing situations since 1976. Habitat is focused mainly on detached houses in the US, but the affiliates in each location are free to decide what kind of construction they want to do, and who's to say whether in the future they might not get interested in eco-villages. And by the way, by far their most famous volunteer was none other than the late President Jimmy Carter. I have no doubt, as a person who's built 3 tiny houses, that working with Habitat for Humanity would shave years off of your timeline as an eco-village developer if you didn't grow up building things. So putting it all together, the idea is to reduce your expenses any way you can: roommates, co-op, bicycling, getting around by bus, growing your own food in the garden, getting the best paying job you can, whether it's in a profession such as nursing, medicine, and accounting, or a trade such as plumbing or electrical. You want to be bringing in that steady paycheck and spending as little of it as you possibly can. And whichever route you go, Habitat for Humanity can help you build your contacts. By the way, they're not paying me to say any of this. You'd also consider taking permaculture courses, extension courses, and volunteering with local community gardens as well to round out your skill set. And again, if you build community along the way, you may find people who are willing to share the risks and help you build the eco-village many years earlier than you would otherwise be able to do on your own. Okay, here's that episode that I promised earlier about converting an existing neighborhood into an eco-village, as well as a couple of the other episodes that I've mentioned earlier today. Thanks as always to the wonderful patrons for supporting this work. I'm really glad that you are part of this. Take care, stay green, see you next time.